I'm sure he's heard every single Batman pun when it comes to the Riddler, and we're going to ask him to riddle us this. But we are talking Buddy Holly, the Buddy Holly story, coming to Musical Theater West in Long Beach, running from July 11th through July 27th. Will Riddle, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. How are you, RC?
Listen, I'm thrilled to talk to you. Buddy Holly was one of the pioneers of rock and roll that was originally slated to be possibly the king of rock and roll before the tragic plane crash. It's been 70 years, so if that's a spoiler for people, I'm sorry.
Yeah, oops, little oops on that one, but I think we'll be okay. I think we can tell the story anyway.
I think so. What's it? Gary Busey played him in, I believe, 1980 or 81. So,
81,
we're
something
on the
like
right
that. Yeah,
trajectory.
yeah, nominated for the Academy Award. Um, yeah, definitely. No, it's so exciting. I mean, Buddy Holly is certainly could have been so much more than he had a chance to be, but what he left behind is, immeasurable. Such an incredible legacy, and to get to be a part of it is a real thrill. So I'm very happy to be here.
Right. When you get to do something like Buddy Holly, we have his recordings and we've had them remastered, we've had them digitized, we've had the original pops that you hear on the vinyl itself. When you
Yeah.
go back and listen to those tracks, how do you differentiate yourself as a performer from not trying to do a voice match or an imitation of Buddy Holly, but making it your own when you sing the songs?
That, that's a great question. I think, for me, when I started as an actor, my initial interest was voice acting. And I wanted to be Bugs Bunny. That was kind of my dream. And so the isolating the vocal quality of Buddy himself is certainly an element of the practice, right? You go in and you listen over and over again, and you try to find what you call like the isms, right? The very specific ways that he would hiccup into notes and things that he's very famous for, is kind of his tonal inflections. But then past a certain point, what's kind of interesting about the way that Buddy has written this music um, is that by virtue of it being true electric rock and roll, you're gonna bring your spirit into it if you connect to the music, and I really do. I mean, I had an opportunity to do this when I was 19 years old. Was the first production of the Buddy Holly story that I ever did, and I remember the first rehearsal, sitting down with the band and starting into the music and realizing, oh my God, like this is nobody ever was able to capture this energy again as a rock artist. I mean, we have so many incredible rock and rollers who have come after, but Buddy is specific, and when you live inside that music, his voice will come out of you. It's just sort of what it's indelible, I guess, is what you could say.
When you go through the audition process, you've played Buddy before. It's got to be a different
Mm.
feeling now that a different version of the show. And especially over here in Long Beach, you're a Southern California native, so it's a quick drive home for you. Unless LAPD or what's it called, Chips starts swerving on the 405 in the middle of the night just to
Yeah.
slow down traffic. But you know, when you get to revisit the character, and now as a more mature person, you were 18 at the time, you're an adult now. You were an adult then, obviously, but I mean, a more mature version of yourself. How do you
Certainly.
bring a different ideology or mentality to it, being, fresh out of high school to now?
That's a great question. Um, well, for one thing, I think good actors are people who have lived full lives. And when I was 18, 19, I had like a sense of Buddy's, maybe his youthful vitality, that sort of thing. But what was kind of fascinating about Buddy as a figure is he had a real uh, a maturity to him historically. People talk about speaking with Buddy about what he wanted to do with music and what he wanted to do with his life, and he is sort of reported as always chasing after the next thing and really sort of pursuing growth, and being on a constant evolution with himself. And so as an adult now, or more of an adult, I guess, I can bring a little bit more of my own personal evolution to his story, my understanding of where he was, a little bit later. We joined Buddy around the time when he's like 19, 20. So it was perfect the first time. And uh, now it's more about just sort of capturing the evolution from beginning of the show to the end, when he's, married. Again, historical fact. Sorry for the spoilers. There's a little bit of a love story in our
Sure.
show. Um, uh, and he's tried to fill his life as much as possible. Um, but I think that as well as just developing tools as an actor. When I was doing it the first time, it's the show that taught me everything that I know now. I learned by a true trial by fire, and on this one, I feel like a more complete artist. And so getting to use all of the tools in my toolbox to tell this story, I mean, it's so exciting. It's a real pleasure.
I just recently learned this term called a jukebox musical, where
Yeah,
it's beloved songs from the movie that get translated into the stage production, or you know
right.
just pop songs that get put in there. But with Buddy Holly, you actually have to have his catalog in there. Um,
Yeah.
when the show was created and you got to perform it, the balance between his original works that he performed and new songs for the musical itself, how do you find the balance in doing Buddy stuff and then the stuff directly specified for the show?
That's a great question. I also have a history with the show Million Dollar Quartet, which is a very similar kind of vibe. I've played Carl Perkins a handful of times, and that's a show where uh, we take a lot of historical liberty, I guess, with the music that they played on the night. Um, and a lesson that I've sort of carried from that to this is, again, it's just sort of about capturing what excited, let's say, Buddy about that music of the era. Now, one of the fortunes of this book, the Alan James book, is that a lot of the music, almost all of the music that I personally perform, is music that Buddy did actually play. There are a few kind of discrepancies. We have a little wiggle room with like what records were released, which performances he would have played them at. But for the most part, everything that I do is something that Buddy actually did. And so there's a lot of recordings that exist, and there's a lot of set lists that people have from his old shows and things that I can go back and try to find little fragments of snippets of. But again, it's mostly just about capturing what was innate about Buddy. And if you have Buddy's electricity, it'll infuse into almost any song.
All right. Yeah. The term jukebox musical is something I don't like, because if it's a show,
Mhm.
like this, obviously you're gonna do Buddy stuff, but like Back to the Future, we'll pick on that very briefly. There's
Sure.
none of the songs from the soundtrack in the musical, or in the musical.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I want to hear. Maybe they didn't get the licensing. Maybe that's a part of it. I don't know the
Mhm.
back end about it. But there's someone like me that loved that movie so much. I want to hear songs
Sure.
from the movie within the musical.
Right.
With this, it would
Yeah.
have been a disservice if you guys didn't put anybody Holly songs in there. But
For
you know,
sure. For sure.
the new songs as well, do they also match the time period tone? Like trying to write for 1953 and 1954, in
Yeah.
that time frame, the songs
Yeah.
that are specified just for the show that aren't the Buddy Holly songs, how
Yeah.
does that work around in this as well? Because this
Well,
is the first
luckily,
time I'm going to
actually,
get to see the show.
oh, amazing. Well, you're gonna have a fantastic time. It's such a great. What's great about this show is it's like a perfect kind of night out show. You show up and there's a really strong story that we're actually telling, but if you're not interested in the story, you really can just come for the music. Um, but be interested in the story. The story's great. But what's really fortunate about this one is we actually we have access to all of the music of the era. There's almost nothing. I'm racking my brain now, making sure I'm not lying. There's nothing in there that is, except for one song that you'll know right away we made up, called "You Won't Work with Me," which is a song at the very beginning of the show. everything else is a song from the era. We get to spend some time with Richie Valens, and we get to spend some time with the Big Bopper, J.P. Richardson, and we get a little bit of Chantilly Lace. We get a little bit of La Bamba. We get all of the music, but there's nothing inauthentic about our show as far as the sound that you're going to be hearing. Up to and including there are a few radio jingles and advertisements that we pull from actual like 1950s radio announcers. Uh, so there's plenty of stuff in there that is truly authentic, and that's one of the things that draws me to this show is like trying to capture that honesty, I guess. Yeah.
When cigarette commercials sponsored everything.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess I won't ruin it for you, but there are
No,
a few
no, but
a few. Yeah.
no, just watching old clips. Like someone was telling me about I Love Lucy, and they showed me the clip. The original opening was, cartoon versions of them on a Philip Morris carton of cigarettes
There it
versus,
is.
you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Winston sponsored the Flintstones initially, which is hilarious to
Right.
think that's something that's,
Right.
beloved as a kid's cartoon today was sponsored by Winston cigarettes. So,
Incredible. Yeah.
so to
We're just
see
we're
that
just
evolution.
throwing them down your throat pretty much.
Yeah.
Just please, here's a carton of cancer. Enjoy. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I don't know. 4 out of 5 doctors back then in the 1950s said they were good for you.
They did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were like great for your voice and they used
Right.
them for speech therapy, stuff like that. Uh
Yeah. Appetite suppressants.
we know a little appetite suppressants for sure. For sure. That's so funny. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Vitamita
it
Vegemin
There you
to
go.
reference
See?
I Love Lucy.
It's interesting going back these 70 years to this era and reliving a different time. I mean, it was the Jim Crow era. It
Mm.
was, black artists couldn't travel with white artists, especially in southern states. So much is going on. And yet, now Richie Valens is being accepted as the first Hispanic rock star,
Mhm.
at least to an extent or as much as they allowed it to be in the 50s. To see
Right.
that evolution of music from then to now and society evolving from then to now, how does that allow you to reflect on the time period without being judgmental through presentism?
That's a really great question. Uh what was so great, that sounds trite. What was kind of beautiful about rock and roll is it was a great unifier. Chuck Berry wrote music that everybody liked. Little Richard wrote music that everybody liked, uh, at least of a generation, right? From the Buddy's actual generation and onward. There were certainly uh, those, especially in the more conservative areas at the time, who were extremely against any kind of people of color making art, period. Um, but in doing a lot of research about Buddy and his relationship to the music and also the people who created the music. Um, you can read all these stories about they would do these big GAC, which was like a touring company. They would do these multi-artist tours, basically, right? Where they would get as many of the like hip hop artists as they could onto a single bill, and then they would do like two shows in a night, basically, at like big, theaters and not quite arenas. We didn't have those yet, but we got there. Um, and they would be integrated. You would have Chuck Berry playing next to the Everly Brothers, and there are numerous stories of getting to the tour bus pulling up at the hotel where they booked everybody, and it was a white hotel, you know, and the black artists couldn't stay with the white artists in that spot, and so they would have to find a new hotel. Buddy has a story, or there's a number of great biographies about him, but there's a story in one of them that they talked about how he basically said at a certain point, he's like, I rather stay at the what they would call the black hotels, right? I'd rather stay there because they're accepting there. They're happy to have us there. But when we go to the white hotels, they can't even fathom that a person of color would be walking in the halls. Um, and it outraged everybody. I mean, I'm sure there were exemptions. Um, but the irony of all of that is that now we sort of have this revisionist history about rock and roll and who gets to own it, and of course it originated with amazing blues players who then, there's examples of Irish musicians meeting up with the Black and African American populations in Appalachia, and that's really like the genesis of rock, is like inside that balance where you have these like slip jigs and things like that, and true rhythm and blues. And Sister Rosetta Tharpe, all these incredible artists, but we don't really talk about them now. We like to talk about Elvis, and I love to talk about Elvis. Elvis is incredible, but we get to touch on it a little bit in the show, and I think we're going to try really hard to give respect to what drew those artists and audiences together. And that's kind of the spirit of rock and roll, genuinely, is just to bring people together of all creeds. You know, uh, that's a big ask, but we're gonna try, and that's what making art's about, I guess. So I hope
Now,
that's not a too insuccinct answer. It's a big
now,
question and one I think about a lot.
right, it is, but it's something that's interesting, especially for the time period of a musical like this and the era
Yeah,
itself.
yeah.
But this also leads to how has your musical taste evolved from playing Buddy when you were 18 to now playing him in this age range, in
Sure.
comparison to like what you used to listen to versus how your horizons have been broadened from it.
Certainly, that's a great question. Um, I spent a lot of time with just Buddy's records the first time that I did the show. A lot of, uh, as many, demos and all of that. There's again so much. It's almost overwhelming the amount of material you can find even after his passing, where there's just like piles and piles and piles of tapes and vinyl records and things that people just have. Um, so I spent a lot of time with Buddy the first time. And then since having done Million Dollar Quartet and a couple other shows, broadened my horizons. Um, you try to think about the influences that would have sort of trickled down into Buddy's world, right? I have a real love of like bluegrass music and what we call Americana now. Um, but Bill Monroe is an incredible artist. Uh, Roy Acuff is incredible, and then Carl Perkins as well. That's an artist that I've gotten to spend a lot of time with. And Carl and Buddy have a lot of sonic similarities. Carl Perkins, of course, wrote Blue Suede Shoes and a couple other pop hits of the time. Blue Suede Shoes being kind of the one, though. Uh, but you can hear, when you start going back further into, what's another example? Johnny Cash records, things like that. What Buddy was actually pulling from, what he was hearing, and how he thought he could extrapolate and evolve on it. Um, and so now playing the show with a wider color palette, you know, it's very exciting to try and like bring in little pieces of influences. There's a song that has a tiny bit of a Johnny Cash flair, so you think about the way that the Tennessee Two would have been playing it, or you listen for that, like, oh, that's a Chuck Berry lick that I'm hearing Buddy kind of interpolate. And so I'm gonna play it kind of the way that Chuck Berry would have played it, because that's what Buddy would try to do. Um, so yeah, it's mostly about just deepening the well from which you pull, you know. And yeah, man, I love playing guitar. Guitar is like the thing that makes me feel most at peace. I come home every day, and it doesn't matter how exhausted I am. The first thing I do is guitar, and it getting to just live in this world and live with this music and these riffs, which are just iconic. It's so satisfying to feel it in your hands. It's a a lot of fun. It's real good.
That was going to be my next question. Do you play your own instrument in the musical?
Yes. Yeah. Every instrumentalist on stage is playing live. There are a few jukebox musicals, which shall remain nameless. No. But where the actors, their musicals are big. They're almost impossible to pull off. And the fact that I get to work in a community of people who can pull them off and uh, make real magic every night. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but it's true. It's musicals are more than the sum of their parts, and it takes a lot of effort. That being said, there are some shows where you gotta sing, you gotta dance, you gotta act, and there's frankly not enough time to learn how to play the guitar or the bass for the onstage performers. So we have incredible pit musicians who take care of that business. But for a show like Buddy Holly, the heart of it, the soul of it, comes from actually playing that music live. That's our triple threat, if you will. Acting, singing, dancing. We have acting, singing. Some of us are dancing. A lot of us will probably be dancing, but the rest of us are playing down. We're playing with every fiber of our being, um, and that's what I think elevates a show like Buddy Holly to the fullest potential of what that story could be about. You know. But yeah, we are playing for real.
Dude, that makes it even more exciting, and it makes me want to see it even more. And luckily, I'm seeing it the second night, so it opens on July 11th. I'm going to be able to be there on the 12th.
Amazing.
So, yeah, what is it like going from opening night to closing night and seeing how your performance shifts? Because obviously, it's a 2 week run, but in that time frame from night one with the opening night jitters to closing night, the performance gets tweaked ever so slightly.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about theater, what separates theater from film or television, is that it's happening in front of you. Theater is, we like to talk about it as like a sacred space. Theater is a lot like, for people who love it, it's a lot like kind of going to a temple or a church. And part of what we are paying reverence to is genuine humanity, the things that make us uh, people and not make us paintings, you know? And so my personal philosophy as an actor is that it has to be completely different every night. Now, obviously, that being said, we have, our blocking where we walk on stage and we have our actual written dialogue, which we speak. Um, and that's locked, because there's a lot of technical elements that are required. We got to hit our marks and make sure the lights are on us, make sure our microphones work properly. And that's highly technical and requires a lot of professionals on the other end. You don't want to ruin their day, for sure. Um, but you can say the same sentence night after night after night. And every single time that you say it, it could mean something completely different to you. And that's the goal, to tell a full version of the story over the course of the run for the audience, but also for yourself, especially encapsulate the life of somebody who is so well known, has such a history. It's one thing to play a character like Hamlet, where you kind of get to bring a lot of yourself to it. Playing a character like Buddy Holly, uh, you're kind of trying to, for me as an actor, what I'm trying to do is make room for Buddy. Get out of Buddy's way and let your perception of who that person is and was out of you into me, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
That's sort of the goal. And the only way to do that is to be completely free. It can't be about, hitting your mark and saying a single piece of dialogue exactly the same way every single night. Because otherwise it becomes a cardboard cutout. And that's not what a person is, but it's also not what rock and roll is, you know? These were vibrant, alive beings. And so it evolves not just from, the very beginning to the very last show, but moment to moment. And it's what is so exciting, and I think why actors keep coming back to the theater, because it forces them to be spontaneous, which is what people respond to. People see themselves in spontaneity.
which seems to be lacking quite a bit these days, so it makes it more exciting.
Hopefully exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was also going to lead into the next thing, which you also brought up in making room for Buddy. When you're
Mhm.
playing somebody that was real versus Hamlet, which is Shakespearean and a fictional character,
Right.
how difficult is it not to fall into caricature when we have all these interviews and stills and videos of him and what he was really like in
Mm.
real life? And obviously, you want to incorporate some of his mannerisms, some of his personal traits into the performance, but it's still William Riddle, not Buddy Holly, but it's William Riddle bringing Buddy Holly back from the dead, essentially.
Yeah. I had a really kind of magical experience. Again, magical sounds very woo-woo, and I guess it is. Acting is kind of woo-woo. It's a little uh, ephemeral and weird because it's you're playing with your emotions and you're using them as tools and you're trying to connect to all kinds of things. But I um, recently did a production of Million Dollar Quartet when I was working with an unbelievable cast of folks. Uh, and in particular, I was working with a gentleman by the name of Peter Oilo, who's an amazing actor and musician. He's available on Spotify and Apple Music. Check him out, Peter Oilo. Um, but he was playing Johnny Cash, and I was playing Carl Perkins, and they were very dear friends in life. And my sort of my in the lead up to the button of this story, my personal philosophy and how you try to avoid caricature is to fill yourself up with as much information as possible, right? So for me, I'm reading as many biographies as I can. I'm watching all of the videos. I'm listening to all of the demo tapes. I'm, every interview, everything that I can get my hands on. I try to consume and put it inside. You store it all, put it all in there. The idea being that if you know the history well enough, you can, in a sense, in a sense, interpret a person's memories as your responses, so to speak. I spent it with Carl Perkins. I spent about a year playing Carl Perkins back to back. And there's this moment on stage during Folsom Prison Blues and Million Dollar Quartet where I would be basically in a musical vamp while another character is performing a piece of dialogue. And the staging was as such that I was looking Peter playing Johnny Cash dead in his eyes, and he was looking into mine. And we were just standing there for maybe 25 seconds, maybe less, probably less, but it felt like a long time. And there was one night towards the end of the run, where all of a sudden, I realized that we got to represent and for a moment reincarnate a, a real love between these two men because we have that love for each other, as Will and as Peter, but as Johnny and as Carl, and that's real and almost tangible, you know. And for a minute on that stage, I was Will and he was Peter, but we were Johnny and Carl, and both were true. And who knows what that looked like to the audience? But that's not my job. It's not my job to care about that. What is my job is to try to capture the life of a person, you know, and the life, not just the ideals or like the how would you say, like the effects, the aesthetic. It's not about that. It's about the life. And so if you fill yourself up with as much information as possible, as much love and respect as you can muster. It's tough for some actors when they're playing, virtual figures. I'm very lucky in that in the case of Buddy, he's a pretty upstanding guy for the most part. And so, that love and respect doesn't come too hard at all. But you just got to make room. You got to make room for that life to come back for a little bit. That's the goal. And everything else, you put it by the wayside. The voice will come. The mannerisms will come, but only if you give yourself as much of the real person as possible to play with.
I like that. Will, for someone like I've never seen the show before, but I am familiar
Yeah.
with Buddy Holly and his music. For someone like me
Mhm.
that hasn't seen the show before but is familiar with the music, what would you
Mhm.
like for me to get out of it? And then for someone that is coming into this totally blind and unfamiliar with who Buddy was, unfamiliar with his songs, or didn't even really pay attention to the era, what would you like that audience to get out of this show?
Well, as a general rule, I'd like the audience to walk away from the show feeling as invigorated by the music as possible. That's like a blanket statement. It would bring me so much joy if we as an ensemble, this entire cast of amazing, amazing performers, are able to transport you, if only with the music. Uh, and that's true for both an audience that knows Buddy and an audience that doesn't. There's I'd love for an audience that doesn't know Buddy to walk away thinking, I want to go put on a real Buddy Holly record. I want to hear what he really sounded like. Um, that's a goal for sure. But there's kind of a secondary goal for me, which is the story of Buddy Holly is typical rock and roll story. This sort of Icarus imagery. We talk about, the 27 Club, we talk about Kurt Cobain, we talk about Janis Joplin, all of these artists that kind of passed before their time, Hendrix. Uh, Buddy is the archetype of that story. And both in the way that both in the actual functional history of his life, but also in the ways in which we, how do you say, sort of proselytize the story of rock and roll and the story of Buddy Holly. You know, um, in his case, it's not the same as a Joplin or a Cobain or Hendrix, in the sense that, like, there's not as much darkness surrounding his his life leading up to his passing. But I think it does. We talk about the day the music died. Incredible piece of music, and I I'd love for an audience to come see the show and feel as though they can kind of grasp onto the culture of rock and roll and how the zeitgeist has evolved over time through the lens of this trip back in history. That's that's my hope, is that we can kind of capture that fabric that you're going to see on every rock star after Buddy. You know, there's a lot of stuff that people kind of pull from his life that has made its way into other things, and we're kind of giving you the keys to the kingdom on seeing all those references and what culture became because of him.
I like it. Well, I can't wait to see the show July 11th through the 27th at Musical Theater West. Will Riddle is Buddy Holly in Buddy the Buddy Holly Story. Where can we find you on social media if we want to connect with you and relive the magic following watching your performance?
Amazing. I am at Will underscore Riddle underscore on pretty much all social media, particularly Instagram. I'm most active there. And also, I'm available. I have a YouTube channel as well. But yeah, Instagram's probably your best bet. And thank you so much for this. This has been such a lovely interview, and these questions have been incredible. I hope I could answer them with some level of depth. But thank you for your time. This has been such a lovely experience.
Listen, thank you for talking to me. I'm excited to see the show. It's nice to see that Buddy Holly is getting recognition. Unfortunately, it's once every 40 years at this point, but we're looking forward
That's true.
to more of it.
We come back around. We keep coming
Yep.
back around. But that's what's great about Buddy, is that you just keep coming back to him. I mean, it's talk about the well, right? That's the fountainhead, is Buddy Holly. You know, Keith Richards, Paul McCartney, every great Bruce Springsteen, all these guys go back to that guy, and there's a reason. And we're going to tell you why.
Which is perfect timing because there is a Bruce Springsteen docudrama coming out. So
Big ups to Jeremy Allen White. Yes, yes, my brother in arms.
thank you so much, Will. I really appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you, man.